Just look at the chest hair on that Marauder. Absolutely glorious. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the Tzeentch versus Ogres matchup. Now that Tzeentch has a whole host of anti-large infantry, let's see how it goes. Although I will say right off the bat, this Tzeentch build is lacking in a certain very powerful unit from the DLC. That is, of course, the ever-present Marauder Horseman. But let's take a look at what he's got. Village on foot, 4 spears up front, couple of Chosen with halberds, and the Severed Claw Regiment of Renowned Aspiring Champions, who are, of course, armed with halberds. A Chariot to clear out Noblars is an interesting choice. We'll see how well that does here. Some Furies and some Screamers. Looks like the Screamers are already taking some damage from some Man-Eater pistols from the submitter of this replay. It's Current Year, playing the Ogres, of course. He's got a couple of Lead Belchers, 2 Man-Eater pistols, including the Powder Guts Regiment of Renown, some Saber Tusk packs here, Iron Fists, Ogre Bulls, and some Noblars, including a couple of Trappers. Looks like 3 Trappers, 3 regular Noblars. Let's get started. Of course, anti-large infantry is still just going to get shelled by Lead Belchers. The armor doesn't really matter, of course. I mean, it does matter a little bit, and certainly the barrier will help them shrug off some of this damage on the approach, but they will suffer the same fate that many elite infantry do against the Ogres, which is to get blasted by armor-piercing missiles, but the spears definitely will be able to trade pretty well here. Barrier helps absorb that ogre charge and the Saber Tusk pack charge, and they're able to get into combat fairly effectively. These bulls collapsing on these marauders here, but the marauders should hold up okay. The Chariot's also getting into play, and the Tzeentch air units swooping down to interrupt, tie down those Lead Belchers, possibly deal some good damage in the case of, I guess, both the Screamers and the Furies, to be honest. Can do effective damage to Lead Belchers. But anyway, yeah, the Halberds fighting in the front line here. We're going to see a nice Maw spell dropped here. Maw actually doesn't do that much armor-piercing damage. Looks pretty impressive, don't get me wrong, but yeah, only 33% AP means it did not as much as you would have hoped against those Chosen. Noblar Trappers throwing in their daggers, though, and the Man-Eater pistols shooting should show a little bit more damage, although it looks like the barrier's starting to replenish on some of those units already. And like here, you can see the little chunks being taken out of the barrier, but still, those Tzeentch halberds not really taking much damage at all. Huge melee defense on the Chosen, 59 melee defense, and the barrier and the heavy armor means the bulls are mostly ineffective against them. It will do quite a bit of damage to the marauders there, but the ogre front line actually crumbles pretty quickly once the ogres, the halberds rather, and spears are able to get into contact. Marauders fall apart pretty quickly, but Village also fairly solid choice in this matchup as he casts pink and blue fires here, charges up his ability. That will make his combat stats fairly formidable, and as long as he keeps up his barrier without taking too much real HP damage, he should be able to continue to fight out in the long term. But yeah, looking on the far side, Chariot's barrier is down, but they have been doing a decent job of cleaning up Noblars, up to 217 kills already. Wow, that is quite impressive. Whereas that army damage value? Okay, so that's actually the gold value damage dealt. It looks like, yeah, the mod update, or sorry, the multiplayer mod did have an update recently. Now shows friendly fire kills, which is pretty interesting to see. But anyway, Trappers firing in there. The halberds advancing continuously. The thing about this situation is, right, Tzeentch seems to be in a pretty decent position, but the lack of mobility is definitely coming back to haunt them at this point. It might have been better to just take, instead of the full-on Chosen with halberds, just warriors with halberds, and then be able to support with some of those Marauder Horsemen, like I mentioned. They're definitely a solid choice against any faction, but in particular against Ogres. One of the main reasons why is these guys right here, the Powder Guts. Let's zoom in close on one of my favorite Ogre units, the Empire kind of free company pistol Ogres, right? With their floppy, fancy hats. They've got great combat stats overall. I mean, 50 and 52 is nice, but then when they start losing combat, or rather if they start losing combat, they get this adaptive tactics that will give them an extra 24 melee attack, melee defense. As another big Maw spell is dropped on the advancing Chosen. You can see basically does very little damage, especially to those aspiring champs. Did a little bit to the Chosen, but anyway. So once these guys start losing to, like, let's say the aspiring champs here, who first of all have to catch them, right? Ogres having faster speed. But even once they get into contact, that attack defense buff does make these guys really hard to kill, right? They go up 70 plus on both attack and defense with that active. So being that as it is, one of the best ways of dealing with them is to shoot them, of course. They don't have a lot of armor. They're very expensive. So follows then that the Marauder Horseman would be a great way to kind of mobily harass and deal damage to them. And Javelin Cavalry in general does quite a bit of damage. Of course, the Tzeentch Marauders with their Warp Flame contact effect just dealing additional damage and even debuffing the armor slightly, which doesn't really matter much against those Man-Eaters, but even just the extra little bit of damage from Warp Fire effect on the actual fire damage itself would be quite good. Here, the regular Man-Eaters are going to get caught by the chariots that allows the spears and the halberds to filter in and start to, here we go, get the Ultra Cinematic Cam, get some damage. So interesting use for the chariots here. We take a look now at their damage value. Still have not paid for themselves, but getting quite a bit of kills, 147 kills. So tactically, thinning out those Noblars can be worthwhile, but let's see what else is going on. Village still holding out, taking very little damage. His stats are high enough that like these 29 attack with these bulls going to be mostly ineffective. 62 defense, not to mention the fact that he's on foot, means he should be able to just maintain his barrier. Not quite as tanky as Sigvald, but can be in certain situations very, very tanky. Fortunately, on the far side here, Severed Claw just met their fate at the hands of the Powder Guts. Powder Guts did end up taking some damage in that melee engagement, but this is what I'm talking about. Like, they can kite and shoot, use up all their ammunition, and then move in and probably still win in a melee engagement. So just absolutely brutal for Tzeentch to have to deal with, but certainly not out of this yet. Still got these Chosen fighting here. Chariots coming back for another run. The Chariots, believe it or not, actually can do some anti-large damage. Like if I pull up the health bar here, you'll see once the Chariots get into contact, if they start doing some attack animations, like you see that, kind of hard to see at this distance, but these guys are doing little like side swoops. The rider on the back with the halberd, right, does a little side swoop attack animation, and that will actually hit for a decent amount of weapon strength. If the charge bonus is still active in particular, I mean, that can hit for a sizable amount of weapon strength, potentially, even though you might not think to use chariots in that way, and I generally wouldn't advise it, but there are niche situations, certainly, have been in the past and still are to this day, where you can use chariots against large units effectively, and it's actually probably a good call. But anyway, this chariot in particular is going to get caught up a little bit, kind of overextends, very low on HP anyway, really didn't have a lot to give, just kind of going for free damage at this point, but it's coming down to just Village and a handful of halberds. Still got these Tzeentch halberds also kind of chasing those Man-Eaters, trying to make sure they don't come back at this point, but pretty much all the ammunition has been used. A couple more volleys on these trappers, but not much else. At best, it's just going to remove the barrier from these guys. We'll see. I mean, there are a lot of trappers there, but nice pink fire from Village to size through the line, roast a whole bunch of them. And yeah, they don't even break the barrier of those Tzeentch halberds there. Impressive stuff. Our chariot friend also comes back from route, the one that does remain, but brutal heal from Ogres, of course. Lore of the Great Maw is one of the best lores in the game, I would say. Generally, lores that have a high tier heal tend to be very strong in general, but Lore of the Great Maw also has some pretty nice buffs and AoE damage, but a brutal Troll Guts there, healing up the Powder Guts who have most of their HP intact. And then here, they're going to grind against Village. So it'll be a little bit of a circle beat for a while as the Floppy Hat Ogres try and slap the Curseling around. Yes. Good times. Village is pretty massive, to be honest. Just overall size of the unit model, but nothing in comparison to the hulking Ogres, obviously. Handful of Tzeentch Chosen halberds do show up to attempt to assist, but we're going to fast forward a little bit now as the Village kind of gets circle beaten. You get the idea. Floppy Hat Ogres pounding him over and over. Actually not doing that great, but they're also not losing combat either, so they're not going to activate their buff, but he just decides to nope out to army losses anyway. So there you go. Big thanks to Itzkernir for sending that one in. It's definitely a fun one. Interesting to see these builds. Kind of Tzeentch going all in on the anti-large infantry to a degree. I mean, he did have the one chariot, which is an interesting kind of side pick. I don't know that I would advise it all the time, but I think it was reasonably useful here. It didn't pay for itself value damage-wise. Did 12,000 total damage dealt, though. So again, tactically, clearing out 210 Noblars, I think, is definitely worth it, especially so that your halberds and spears don't get dragged down into them. I just think probably need a little bit of extra mobility plus skirmish damage. Marauder Horsemen fulfill both of those beautifully. So you could cut the one Tzeentch Chosen, maybe both the Tzeentch Chosen down to Warriors, and I have to look at the actual cost differential and see, but I think that should open up 2, maybe 3 Marauder Horsemen that you could add on. Just have some extra width here, have some skirmish damage to help deal with something like the Powder Guts. Can be very scary and tough to deal with in melee. I mean, yeah, it's just it's an interesting one for sure. The Man-Eaters obviously carry a lot of the value damage. A lot of the other things struggle. Like one bull manages to pay for itself. The Trappers are probably okay. Yeah, pretty decent. 330 value on Noblars is also fantastic. For Tzeentch, one of the Tzeentch Halberd Chosen did great. The Spears are all fairly cost-effective, and I might even go with one more Spear here, just to max out on 5. Screamers are all right. They're okay. I don't know. It might be better to just go with more Furies as well, just to kind of cost optimize this as much as possible. But I do like the pick of Village also. It's definitely an interesting matchup, and hope to see more in the future of it. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. The Tzeentch anti-large units definitely add a pivotal melee component in this matchup that you have to account for. But I don't know if it really flips this matchup heavily in Tzeentch's favor, more so than it was before. I don't know. It's kind of always been either even or slightly Tzeentch favored in my opinion. Maybe you guys have a different opinion, but let me know in the comments below. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.